She saved the wolf everyone feared, not knowing it belonged to the Alpha King. Before we begin, imagine this. Somewhere in a forgotten corner of the kingdom, a gentle Omega is about to make a choice that no one else would make. While others choose fear, she chooses kindness. While others walk away, she stays. Because in this world, kindness is never weakness. It is the beginning of every legend. Sometimes, the smallest act of compassion can change a destiny in ways no one could ever imagine. If you love emotional Alpha King and Omega stories where kindness is stronger than power, loyalty is worth more than pride, and forgotten Omegas become legends, you've found the perfect place. Please subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Thank you for being here. Now, let's begin today's unforgettable story. Everyone ran from the Black Wolf, except the forgotten Omega, who walked straight toward it. The terrified cries echoed across Frostpine's eastern boundary as hunters burst through the snow-covered trees, their weapons raised toward a shadow larger than any wolf most of them had ever seen. Stories about the beast had spread for weeks. Shepherds swore it slaughtered livestock without mercy. Patrols claimed it vanished like smoke after every attack. Parents warned their children that if they wandered beyond the old pines, the monster would be waiting. Fear had grown into certainty long before anyone stopped to ask whether the stories were true. Alara Whitmore heard those same rumors every day, yet the sight before her shattered every terrifying image they had created. The enormous black wolf lay half-collapsed beneath a cluster of frost-covered evergreens. Blood stained the white ground beneath one shoulder, and every strained breath seemed to cost more strength than the last. When its amber eyes found hers, she expected rage. Instead, she saw exhaustion, and pain so deep it almost looked human. Years of caring for injured animals had taught Alara something most people never understood. Creatures in agony often appeared dangerous because suffering left them with no other language. She took one careful step closer, keeping her hands visible and her breathing slow. The wolf watched her without moving. Behind her, pounding boots crushed through the snow. "There!" Captain Grant Harlow shouted, emerging with 6 patrolmen at his side. Spears lifted instantly toward the wounded animal. Relief spread across several frightened faces. At last, they believed, the nightmare was cornered. "Stand back, Whitmore," Grant ordered sharply. "We're ending this now." Alara didn't move. She glanced once more at the wolf. It struggled simply to keep its head upright. Fresh blood seeped steadily through its dark coat, yet it made no attempt to charge. "It's badly hurt," she said quietly. Grant's expression hardened. "It's killed enough already. Did you see it do that?" His jaw tightened. "The whole pack knows what it is." Alara looked again at the animal. The low rumble rising from its chest wasn't the sound of a hunter preparing to attack. It only came whenever another spear edged closer to the wound. The difference mattered. Unfortunately, no one else seemed willing to notice. "You've always been too soft," Grant said. "That's why people stop listening to you." The words should have hurt. They had for years. Alara had spent most of her life as the Omega everyone overlooked. She never completed the powerful wolf shift expected of her kind. While others trained for glory, she cleaned treatment rooms, cared for injured creatures, and quietly disappeared whenever stronger voices filled the room. Somewhere along the way, people stopped seeing her altogether. But the frightened animal lying in the snow saw her. It watched every movement she made with cautious attention, not hatred. That quiet connection was enough. Alara stepped forward until she stood directly between the wolf and the waiting spears. Gasps spread through the patrol. "Move," Grant warned. "If it attacks, no one can save you." She slowly shook her head. "If you throw that spear, you'll kill something that can't even stand." Snow drifted gently around them. Behind her, the wolf's rough breathing brushed against the back of her cloak. She felt no urge to run, only the overwhelming certainty that leaving now would be the cruelest thing she could ever do. Grant's grip tightened around the shaft of his spear. "Last chance, Whitmore." Alara lifted her chin. "Then you'll have to go through me first." For one endless heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the wounded wolf looked into her eyes again. This time, something changed. The fear inside those amber eyes slowly faded, replaced by quiet trust, the kind that could never be demanded, only earned. Grant's grip tightened, but before the spear could fly, Mara Langley stepped between the patrol and the clearing with the quiet authority that only decades of healing could command. "If you intend to kill it," she said evenly, "you'll first explain why an animal already collapsing from blood loss deserves execution instead of examination." Several hunters exchanged uncertain glances. Grant lowered the point just enough to avoid openly defying Frostpine's senior healer, though irritation darkened his face. "You have 1 hour," he warned. "If that thing disappears, every consequence falls on her." He jabbed a finger toward Alara before signaling his patrol to withdraw, their footsteps fading into the winter woods. Only when silence settled again did Alara slowly kneel. The great wolf still watched her, every muscle taut, yet it made no attempt to strike. Mara crouched several paces away, studying the wound without moving closer. "It's lodged deep," she murmured. "Metal, not a claw." Alara nodded. "Can you help me move him?" Mara hesitated, reading something in the animal's steady gaze that unsettled even her experienced instincts. "No," she answered softly. "If 2 people approach, he may panic. But he already chose not to attack you." Those words lingered. "Chose." Alara swallowed, then carefully removed her wool cloak and spread it over the snow. She spoke no commands, only gentle reassurance, allowing the wolf to hear her breathing before inching closer. After a long, unbearable pause, the massive creature lowered its head a fraction. It was enough. Working patiently, she slipped the cloak beneath its chest as much as its weight allowed. Each movement drew a strained rumble, but never another attempt to bite. Together, inch by exhausting inch, Alara guided the weakened animal toward an abandoned storage shed once used for winter grain, hidden behind the neglected edge of the treatment grounds where few villagers ever wandered. The journey took far longer than it should have. Several times the wolf nearly collapsed completely, and each time Alara steadied it despite knowing one frightened movement could end her life. By the time they reached the weathered building, dusk had painted the snow blue. Inside, dust floated through thin beams of fading light. Old hay still covered part of the floor, dry enough to offer warmth. The wolf finally sank onto the bedding with a heavy breath that seemed almost relieved. Only then did Alara fully examine the injury. Beneath the matted fur, a narrow shard of blackened steel protruded from the shoulder at an unnatural angle. The surrounding flesh had swollen, angry, and inflamed. "This wasn't an accident," Mara whispered after slipping quietly inside with a small leather satchel of supplies. "Someone drove this in deliberately." Alara accepted the basin of warm water, clean cloths, and herbs without answering. She knew every second mattered now. Kneeling beside the exhausted animal, she rested one hand where its heartbeat thundered beneath dense fur. "I'm going to help," she whispered. "It will hurt." Amber eyes met hers again. The wolf neither growled nor retreated. Taking that silent permission, Alara gripped the jagged fragment with iron tongs. "Ready," Mara breathed. One swift pull. The metal came free in a burst of dark blood. The wolf threw back its head with a roar that shook dust from the rafters, but even through blinding agony, it never turned on the woman kneeling beside it. Alara immediately packed the wound with crushed winter moss and healing herbs, pressing firmly until the bleeding slowed. Long minutes passed before the animal's breathing finally steadied. Exhaustion overtook it, and its enormous head settled against the hay within arm's reach of her boots. Mara stared in quiet disbelief. "I've treated wolves for 30 years, she said. "I've never seen one place this much trust in a stranger." Alara brushed damp strands of hair from her face, her hands trembling only now that the danger had passed. "Maybe it was never looking for someone to fear," she answered. "Maybe it was only waiting for someone who wouldn't." Outside, unseen beyond the frosted window, a pair of watchful eyes disappeared into the darkening trees. Grant had not believed his own warning would be enough, and as he turned toward Frostpine Village, one thought hardened inside him. If Alara Whitmore insisted on protecting the beast, then tomorrow the entire pack would learn exactly where she had hidden it. Morning arrived beneath a pale sky that made Frostpine look peaceful, though Alara knew calm could disappear as quickly as fresh snow beneath marching boots. She woke on the rough wooden floor beside the resting wolf, her back stiff and her fingers still stained with dried blood from the night before. For the first time since finding him, she heard something different. His breathing had settled into a slow, steady rhythm. The fever had not vanished, but it no longer sounded as though each breath was a battle. As she reached for a fresh cloth, the great animal lifted his head without hostility, watching her every movement with quiet awareness. The fierce suspicion that had guarded every glance the previous day had softened into careful acceptance. Alara offered a small smile before replacing the bandages around the wound. As she gently separated the thick fur beneath his left ear to clean away dried blood, something hard brushed against her fingertips. She paused. Hidden beneath the dark coat rested a narrow metal clasp unlike anything she had ever seen. It was forged from polished silver, engraved with the image of a crescent moon wrapped around the profile of a wolf. The workmanship was flawless despite scratches from recent fighting. There was no leather collar attached, only the emblem secured directly into a reinforced harness concealed beneath the animal's coat. "Mara," Alara called quietly. The older healer entered carrying fresh herbs, but the moment she saw the crest, the color drained from her face. She lowered herself beside Alara without touching it. "Cover that," she whispered. "Now." Confused, Alara folded the fur back into place. "What is it?" Mara remained silent long enough for the question itself to become frightening. Finally, she answered in a voice barely above a breath. "I've only seen that mark once, years ago, when the royal delegation crossed Frost Pine." Her eyes never left the wolf. "That isn't made for ordinary beasts." Alara frowned. "Then whose is it?" Mara hesitated before replying. "I don't know for certain, but it belongs close enough to the throne that no one here should ever pretend they found it." The weight of those words settled heavily inside the tiny shed. Alara looked back toward the animal, suddenly seeing details she had overlooked in her exhaustion. Old scars crossed his shoulders with the clean precision of battlefield wounds rather than the random marks of wild survival. His thick coat had been groomed before the recent attack. Even his posture, despite weakness, carried an unmistakable discipline. This creature had not been wandering the forest his entire life. Someone had trained him with extraordinary care. Before Alara could speak again, hurried footsteps approached outside. Owen Pike's freckled face appeared through a crack in the weathered door. The boy's cheeks were red from running. "Miss Whitmore," he whispered urgently. "They're looking everywhere for you." Alara stepped outside, easing the door shut behind her. "Who?" "Captain Grant." Owen struggled to catch his breath. "Miss Vanessa too. They told everyone the wolf is cursed. They're saying whoever hides it is helping whatever attacked the livestock." Alara's heart tightened. "Did anyone see you come here?" Owen shook his head. "I took the creek path." He glanced nervously toward the building. Is it really as terrible as they say?" Alara looked back at the closed door. "No," she answered honestly. "It's frightened. There's a difference." The boy considered her words before giving a determined nod and hurrying away. Inside, Mara was already packing away supplies. "We can't keep this secret much longer," she admitted. "Grant won't stop after searching the village." Alara rested one hand lightly against the wolf's shoulder. He remained still, though his amber eyes followed every sound beyond the walls. "If I tell them where he is," she said quietly, "they'll kill him before asking who he truly belongs to." Mara's expression grew troubled. "And if you don't, someone may accuse you of treason without either of us understanding why." Silence settled between them until the wolf slowly nudged Alara's wrist with his muzzle, not demanding anything, simply remaining close. She looked down and noticed another detail she had missed. Stitched into the inside edge of the hidden harness, nearly concealed beneath thick fur, was a single line of faded lettering. She brushed away the last traces of dried blood to read it more clearly. Before she could make out the words, a deep hunting horn echoed across Frost Pine, followed by the distant voices of dozens of searchers spreading through the forest, drawing steadily closer to the place only a handful of people now knew existed. The distant hunting horn had barely faded when Mara Langley caught Alara's wrist, stopping her before she could lift the edge of Rook's hidden harness again. "Not here," Mara whispered, her voice tighter than Alara had ever heard it. "If someone sees that crest before we understand it, they'll stop asking questions and start making accusations." Alara reluctantly folded the thick fur back into place. Outside, the forest had changed. Voices echoed from every direction as Grant Harlow divided his patrol into smaller groups, sending them through abandoned barns, frozen creek beds, and forgotten trails. Vanessa Crowley moved among the frightened villagers, repeating the same warning until it sounded like unquestionable truth. The black wolf had become the enemy everyone expected to find. Fear spread faster than fresh snowfall, and by afternoon nearly every family had barred their doors. Hidden inside the weathered storage shed, Rook struggled to rise. His injured shoulder trembled beneath his weight before giving way, forcing him back onto the bed of dry hay. He never cried out. He simply tried again. Watching him, Alara realized that true strength was not measured by how loudly someone fought, but by how quietly they refused to surrender. She knelt beside him and began preparing another poultice from crushed winter herbs. As she worked, Mara watched in thoughtful silence. "You know," the older healer finally said, "there were moments years ago that never made sense to me." Alara glanced up. Mara smiled faintly, lost in memory. "Do you remember the orphaned fox cub everyone believed would die after the spring floods?" Alara nodded. "You stayed with it all night." Mara continued. "By sunrise, its fever had broken. Then there was the injured hawk, whose wings should never have healed well enough to fly again. And the frightened mare that calmed the moment you laid a hand on her neck." Alara looked down at her own hands. She had always believed those recoveries were luck. Or perhaps the animals had simply been stronger than anyone expected. Mara slowly shook her head. "I stopped calling them coincidences a long time ago. I just never understood what I was seeing." Before Alara could answer, Rook shifted uneasily. She instinctively rested both palms against the thick fur surrounding the wound. Warmth spread beneath her fingertips, not hot enough to burn, but gentle, like sunlight reaching frozen ground after a long winter. She drew in a surprised breath. A faint golden shimmer flickered beneath her skin, flowing quietly into the injured shoulder. The swollen flesh gradually relaxed. Rook's harsh breathing softened. The trembling that had refused to leave him since the attack slowly faded away. Alara pulled her hands back in disbelief, and the glow disappeared as suddenly as it had come. Neither woman spoke. They simply stared at the wound that now looked noticeably healthier than it had only moments earlier. Mara finally broke the silence. "It wasn't the herbs." Alara could only shake her head. "I didn't mean to. I know." Mara's voice carried neither fear nor excitement, only quiet certainty. "Whatever lies inside you has always been there. Today it finally chose to reveal itself." As though sensing the change as well, Rook carefully lowered his massive head until it rested against Alara's shoulder. There was no hesitation left between them now, only complete trust. She wrapped one arm gently around his neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the dark fur. The moment lasted only seconds before hurried footsteps raced toward the shed. Owen Pike burst through the doorway, his face pale with panic. "Miss Whitmore," he gasped. "Captain Grant found blood by the creek. They're following the trail here." Mara immediately gathered her satchel. "We don't have time." Alara looked at Rook. Although his strength had clearly improved, he still could not outrun armed hunters across the mountain trails. Leaving him behind meant certain death. Staying guaranteed they would both be found. Before she could decide, Rook suddenly lifted his head, ears sharply focused toward the distant forest. A deep sound rolled from his chest. Not a warning, but a call filled with unmistakable recognition. Far beyond the trees, another howl answered, ancient, commanding, and impossibly powerful. Every bird exploded from the surrounding pines. Grant's patrol stopped shouting. Miles away, atop a snow-covered ridge, Darian Blackwood slowly raised his head toward Frost Pine. Beside him, Caleb Mercer listened to the echo fading across the valley before quietly saying the words that changed the course of every life involved. "Your Majesty, Rook has found someone before we found him." The echo of Caleb Mercer's words lingered over the frozen ridge as Darian Blackwood urged his stallion into a relentless gallop toward Frost Pine. His expression unreadable except for the dangerous stillness that settled over him whenever something precious was threatened. For 3 days he had tracked scattered signs of battle across the northern forests, finding broken arrows, scorched earth, and the unmistakable scent of betrayal. Rook had never wandered from his side without reason. Someone had separated them deliberately. Back inside the weathered shed, Alara had no knowledge of the king racing toward her, only the growing certainty that every passing minute narrowed her choices. The hunting parties were closing in from every direction, their voices now close enough to distinguish individual commands. Mara secured the last of her supplies before turning to Alara with weary resolve. "Listen carefully," she said. "If they discover him here, Grant will claim you endangered the entire pack. No one will wait for explanations." Alara looked at the enormous wolf resting beside her. His breathing had strengthened after the strange warmth that had flowed through her hands, yet he still could not outrun trained hunters. Leaving him meant condemning him. Remaining beside him meant condemning herself. The decision should have been impossible. Instead, it came with remarkable clarity. "Then they won't find him here," she answered. Mara stared at her. "You're moving him?" Alara nodded once. "If he stays, he dies." There was no fear left in her voice, only quiet conviction. It was the first time Mara realized the timid Omega the village had overlooked for years was gone. In her place stood a woman prepared to lose everything for a life no one else believed deserved saving. Working together, they guided Rook through a narrow passage behind the abandoned shed that opened onto an old trapping trail long forgotten after heavy winters buried its entrance beneath tangled brush. Progress was painfully slow. More than once the great wolf faltered, but whenever he stumbled, Alara remained beside him without hesitation. She spoke little, saving her strength for the difficult climb through dense pines where fresh snowfall quickly covered their tracks. Behind them, Owen quietly crossed the open clearing carrying an empty basket. When Grant intercepted him, the boy forced himself not to glance toward the hidden trail. "Have you seen Whitmore?" Grant demanded. Owen swallowed hard before shaking his head. "She went toward the river this morning." It was his first deliberate lie, and guilt flushed across his freckled face even as Grant barked fresh orders and redirected half the search party away from the mountainside. By the time Owen dared breathe again, Alara had vanished beyond the trees. High above Frost Pine, Darian and Caleb reached the village gates. Alpha Silas Crowley greeted them with practiced courtesy, masking unease behind formal respect. "Your Majesty," Silas said with a measured bow, "we've already begun searching for the dangerous creature reported in our territory." Darian dismounted without returning the greeting. His silver eyes swept across the crowded square before settling on drops of darkened blood frozen near the eastern road. He crouched only briefly, touching the crimson stain with gloved fingertips. Rook's scent remained unmistakable beneath the cold air. He slowly rose. "You call him a creature," Darian said, his voice calm enough to unsettle everyone present. "I call him family." Silence spread across the square. Even Grant, arriving moments later, felt the weight of those words. Caleb stepped forward, producing the black shard that had been recovered days earlier from the ambush site. "The weapon used against him was forged by northern craftsmen," he announced. Someone inside these territories wanted the king's companion to disappear. Grant's confidence wavered for the first time. Vanessa exchanged a fleeting glance with her father before quickly looking away. Darian noticed both reactions, but said nothing. His attention had already shifted elsewhere. Closing his eyes, he drew one slow breath. Beneath smoke, pine, and snow lingered another scent, soft, unfamiliar, carrying traces of herbs, cedar, and something strangely comforting woven around Rook's trail. The wolf had not survived alone. Someone had remained with him. Darian opened his eyes. "Find the woman," he ordered quietly. At almost the same moment, miles away along the hidden mountain path, Alara helped Rook over a fallen cedar as the exhausted animal suddenly stopped and lifted his head toward the wind. His ears sharpened. His amber eyes brightened with unmistakable recognition. Then, without warning, he turned away from the safety of the forest and began pulling gently, but insistently, back toward the king who was already searching for them both. Branches snapped somewhere below the ridge, and Alara stopped so abruptly that Rook nearly brushed against her. The great wolf's ears flattened, his body angling protectively across the narrow trail, instead of continuing toward the scent he had clearly recognized moments before. She followed his gaze just as voices drifted upward through the pines. "Spread out," Grant Harlow shouted. "They can't have gone far." Her heart sank. Owen's brave lie had bought them time, but not enough. Mara's warning echoed in her thoughts. There would be no explanations once the hunters found them. She searched the slope and spotted a shallow rock overhang half-concealed beneath tangled evergreens. It would never hide them for long, yet it offered one final chance. Guiding Rook inside, She knelt beside him as his breathing grew labored again from the climb. Only then did she remember the unfinished inscription hidden beneath the harness. With trembling fingers, she carefully folded back the leather lining. This time the faded stitching became visible in the filtered light. The words were simple: Royal Guardian, Rook. Return only to Darien Blackwood. Alara stared in stunned silence. Mara had guessed the crest belonged near the throne, but reality struck harder than imagination. The wounded animal she had defended against her own pack was not merely valuable. He belonged to the Alpha King himself. Before she could absorb the revelation, Rook nudged her hand insistently, as though urging her to leave. His amber eyes held no panic now, only determination. Alara understood. If Grant captured her beside the king's companion, every accusation Mara had feared would become unavoidable. Yet abandoning him felt impossible. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered. Rook answered with a low, steady rumble unlike any sound she had heard before, almost gentle despite its power. Down in Frostpine Village, Darien stood in the center of the square while Caleb quietly examined recovered evidence. One broken arrow carried traces of black resin identical to the poison that had been weakening Rook. "The toxin wasn't meant to kill quickly," Caleb said. "It slows movement, clouds instinct, and drives an animal toward populated territory." Darien's expression darkened. Someone wanted him mistaken for a rogue beast. The conclusion settled heavily over everyone listening. This had never been an accident. It had been a calculated trap. Before further questions could be asked, Owen pushed through the gathering crowd, breathless after running from the eastern hills. His frightened eyes searched until they found Darien instead of Grant. Every instinct told him to remain silent, yet the memory of Alara shielding the injured wolf refused to let him. "Your Majesty," the boy blurted, voice shaking. "The wolf never hurt her. She saved him. Captain Grant tried to kill him first." The square fell silent. Grant stepped forward immediately. "He's confused." "I'm not," Owen insisted. Miss Whitmore pulled iron out of his shoulder. She hit him because nobody else would help. Grant's face hardened. "Enough." Darien raised one gloved hand, and the argument ended before another word could be spoken. "Where?" he asked the boy quietly. Owen hesitated only a heartbeat before pointing toward the mountain trails. Darien mounted his horse in one fluid motion. "Caleb." The commander nodded and signaled the royal guard. Within seconds they were riding toward the ridge. Grant watched them disappear, then turned sharply toward his own patrol. "Move," he barked. "We reached them first." Above the valley, Alara heard hoofbeats carried faintly through the wind. They came from two different directions. One steady and disciplined, the other hurried and aggressive. The distance between both groups was closing rapidly. She helped Rook to his feet, but after only a few steps he staggered. The poison was losing its grip, yet his strength had not fully returned. She could not outrun armed hunters while supporting an animal of his size. Then a spear slammed into the trunk of a pine only yards ahead, quivering violently. Grant's voice rang across the mountainside. "Step away from the wolf, Whitmore." More patrolmen emerged among the trees, surrounding the narrow pass. Alara instinctively moved in front of Rook once again, just as she had on the first day. She stood alone between sharpened steel and the creature everyone still believed should die. Somewhere beyond the next rise, another presence was approaching with astonishing speed, and Rook suddenly lifted his head toward the wind, letting out a deep call that rolled across the mountains like thunder. Grant's men closed in from every side, spear points gleaming between the pines, until the narrow pass became a trap with nowhere left to retreat. Alara refused to step aside. Her heartbeat thundered against her ribs, yet her feet stayed rooted before Rook as though the choice had already been made long before this moment. Grant lifted his spear, fury replacing every trace of caution. "Move," he growled. "That beast has already poisoned your judgment." Alara met his eyes without lowering her own. "He's wounded, not murderous." Grant gave a bitter laugh. "You'll die defending something that would forget your name tomorrow. Then let that be my decision." The words hung in the frozen air. Grant's patience shattered. He drove forward, raising the spear for a killing strike aimed past Alara's shoulder. Before the weapon could descend, a deafening howl exploded across the mountainside. Every hunter froze. The forest itself seemed to recoil as birds burst from the treetops and snow cascaded from heavy branches. An instant later, a massive black stallion burst through the trees. Its rider wore a long dark coat that snapped behind him like a storm cloud, and his silver eyes locked immediately onto the wolf standing behind Alara. Rook answered with a deep, unmistakable cry and, despite his injuries, forced himself forward 3 staggering steps before lowering his enormous head. The entire mountainside fell silent. Grant's hand trembled. Every member of the patrol recognized the rider even before he spoke. Darian Blackwood dismounted in one fluid motion, never taking his gaze from Rook. He crossed the remaining distance without haste, kneeling beside the wolf and resting one gloved hand against the scarred forehead that had survived countless battles at his side. Rook leaned into the touch with quiet relief, releasing a long breath that sounded almost peaceful after days of suffering. Only then did Darian notice the carefully wrapped shoulder, the fresh bandages, the clean wound where the poisoned steel had been removed. His eyes shifted toward Alara. There was dried blood on her sleeves, exhaustion in every line of her face, and small cuts across hands that had clearly worked without rest. She instinctively took one uncertain step backward, suddenly aware that she stood before the most feared ruler in the Northern Territories. Darian rose slowly. "Who treated him?" he asked. No one answered. Grant opened his mouth first. "Your Majesty, this Omega interfered with. I did not ask who interfered." Darian's calm voice carried more weight than a shouted command. "I asked who saved him." Silence lingered until Alara quietly said, "I only did what anyone should have done." Darian studied her for several long moments. "No," he replied. "You did what no one else chose to do." Caleb Mercer arrived with the Royal Guard only seconds later. One glance at Rook confirmed everything. He examined the discarded shard of blackened metal Alara had wrapped inside a cloth after removing it from the wound. His expression hardened. "The poison is exactly the same." He turned toward Darian. "This came from the ambush." Darian accepted the fragment, his fingers tightening around it. "Someone here wanted my guardian hunted as a monster." Grant immediately pointed toward Alara. "She concealed royal property instead of reporting it. Because you tried to execute him before asking a single question," came another voice. Owen Pike pushed through the frightened patrolman, his face pale but determined. "She stood in front of your spear twice." Mara Langley emerged beside him, no longer willing to remain silent. "I witnessed his condition. Without Alara, he would have bled to death before sunrise." Darian's attention returned to Alara. "Did you know who he belonged to?" She slowly shook her head. "Not until today. By then, it didn't matter." "Why?" he asked quietly. Alara glanced toward Rook, whose amber eyes never left her. "Because suffering doesn't become less worthy of kindness simply because you don't know its name." Those simple words struck the mountainside harder than any roar. Even the royal guards lowered their eyes. Darian looked from the woman to the wolf resting peacefully at her side, something he had never seen Rook do with any stranger. At last he understood why the bond between them felt impossible to ignore. He reached beneath Rook's harness and drew out a hidden leather packet that had survived the attack. Breaking its seal, he unfolded the water-damaged message inside. Caleb read the faded handwriting first, and every trace of color disappeared from his face. He looked up sharply. "Your Majesty." Darian took the letter, his silver eyes scanning the final legible line. When he finished reading, he slowly turned toward Alpha Silas Crowley, who had just arrived with Vanessa and several elders at the edge of the clearing. "The attack on Rook," Darian said, his voice colder than the surrounding winter, "did not begin in the forest. It began inside Frostpine. No one moved. No one breathed. And for the first time since this story began, the true enemy was no longer hiding in the shadows." Silence settled over the mountains after Darian's final words, but it no longer carried fear. It carried truth. One by one, the hunters lowered their spears, no longer looking at Rook as a monster, but as a wounded guardian who had survived because a woman everyone overlooked refused to abandon him. Alpha Silas Crowley slowly removed the ceremonial pin from his cloak, his shoulders seeming older than they had only hours before. "Whatever judgment follows," he said quietly to Darian, "my failures made this possible." Darian held his gaze for a long moment before answering. A leader is not judged only by the enemies he defeats, but by the wrongs he allows beneath his own roof. Silas lowered his head, offering no excuse. Nearby, Caleb Mercer continued examining the recovered letter alongside the poisoned steel fragment. The combined evidence exposed a network of corrupt officials who had manipulated patrol reports, altered supply routes, and ensured Rook would be driven toward Frost Pine before anyone realized what had happened. Grant's face drained of color as each piece fell into place. He had believed he was protecting his people. Instead, he had become a weapon in another man's plan. "I never questioned the orders," he admitted hoarsely. "I thought obedience was loyalty." Caleb answered without anger. "Loyalty without judgment becomes dangerous." 2 royal guards escorted Grant away. He did not resist. Vanessa remained motionless beside her father, tears gathering for the first time since anyone could remember. She looked toward Alara, searching for the timid Omega she had mocked for years. Instead, she found a woman quietly adjusting Rook's bandages before checking the healing wound one last time. After a long hesitation, Vanessa stepped closer. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely steady. "About you. About him. About almost everything." Alara looked at her for a moment before simply nodding. She offered neither triumph nor resentment. Some victories did not need either. Watching from nearby, Mara felt unexpected pride. She crossed the clearing carrying a clean pair of gloves and gently slipped them into Alara's hands. "I should have defended you sooner," she admitted. "I kept waiting for the right moment." Alara smiled softly. "You came when I needed you." Mara shook her head. "Next time, I'll come sooner." Their quiet exchange did not go unnoticed. Several villagers who had once turned away from Alara now slowly approached. An elderly shepherd removed his wool cap. A young mother thanked her for proving that fear should never replace compassion. No grand speeches followed. Small acts of respect carried far more weight than apologies shouted before a crowd. A few steps away, Owen cautiously sat beside Rook. The great wolf lowered himself onto the snow and allowed the boy to scratch behind one ear, drawing a laugh that echoed through the clearing. The same children who had hidden behind their parents only days earlier now peeked curiously from a safe distance, discovering that the terrifying beast could rest peacefully beside someone who trusted him. Darian watched every moment in silence. He had led armies, negotiated treaties, and ended rebellions. Yet none of those victories had changed hearts the way one quiet Omega had done simply by refusing to walk away from suffering. He finally approached Alara. "There is something you should know," he said. When Rook was still a pup, no trainer could earn his complete trust. He chose only once in his life. Alara looked toward the wolf, who had already settled comfortably at her side despite his king standing only a few feet away. Darian smiled faintly. "It appears he has made that choice a second time." Almost as if he understood every word, Rook rose, walked first to Darian, brushed his shoulder affectionately, then crossed back and rested against Alara once more. There was no conflict in the gesture. He was not choosing between them. He was bringing them together. Warm afternoon sunlight finally broke through the lingering clouds, scattering across the snow like countless fragments of gold. Darian followed Rook's gaze before meeting Alara's eyes. "The physicians at the royal stronghold can complete his recovery," he said. "But healing isn't only about medicine anymore." He paused, leaving the decision entirely in her hands. "Come with us, not because I command it, but because he already told me where he believes he belongs." Alara looked from the king to the wolf resting quietly beside her, then turned once toward Frost Pine, the only home she had ever known. For the first time in her life, leaving no longer felt like losing everything. It felt like walking toward the place where she had finally been seen. Alara remained silent for several heartbeats, her fingers resting lightly against Rook's restored harness as the last rays of daylight painted the snow with pale gold. She had spent years believing her place in Frostpine was to remain unnoticed, to accept whatever role others assigned her. Now the entire valley waited for her answer. Darian did not step closer or press her with another word. He simply stood beside the wolf they both loved, allowing the choice to belong entirely to her. That single act told Alara more about the man than every frightening rumor she had ever heard. At last she lifted her eyes. "If Rook still needs me," she said quietly, "I'll go until he's well enough to choose for himself." A faint smile touched Caleb Mercer's face before disappearing again beneath professional composure. Darian inclined his head, accepting her decision not as an order fulfilled, but as a gift freely given. The journey to the royal stronghold lasted several days. Rook's strength returned a little with each sunrise. His stride grew steadier, his appetite stronger, and the dull exhaustion that had shadowed his amber eyes slowly faded. Yet every evening, after the guards finished making camp, he would leave Darian's side for a few quiet moments to settle beside Alara's fire, resting his great head near her boots exactly as he had in the abandoned shed. No command had taught him that habit. Trust had. At the fortress, royal physicians examined the wound one final time before declaring the poison completely gone. Caleb's investigation also reached its conclusion. The damaged letter hidden beneath the harness had been written by a scout who uncovered a plan to capture Rook and drive him into Frost Pine, hoping frightened villagers would destroy the king's closest companion without anyone tracing the conspiracy back to its true architects. Evidence gathered from patrol records, forged travel orders, and the poisoned weapon exposed the involvement of several corrupt officials who had manipulated Silas Crowley's counsel for personal gain. Grant admitted following false commands without questioning them, while Vanessa confessed she had chosen ambition over honesty when fear began spreading through the pack. Darian removed Silas from leadership until a lawful successor could be chosen by Frostpine's elders, making it clear that authority carried responsibility as well as privilege. Weeks later, Mara received an unexpected letter bearing the royal seal. Inside was an invitation restoring cooperation between Frostpine's healers and the Northern Court, along with enough medical supplies to care for every family through the coming winter. At the bottom of the page appeared a single handwritten sentence from Darian. Kindness shown to one life strengthens an entire kingdom. When Mara finished reading, she quietly folded the letter and smiled, thinking of the young Omega everyone had once underestimated. Life inside the stronghold changed Alara in quieter ways. No one mocked her careful hands. Stable workers greeted her by name. Young apprentices sought her advice after watching frightened animals calm at her gentle touch. She never demanded respect. She earned it one small act at a time. One crisp morning, several months after arriving, Alara walked through the palace gardens carrying fresh herbs when she noticed Rook standing beneath an old cedar beside Darian. The great wolf glanced from one to the other before calmly crossing the distance and positioning himself between them. Then, with complete certainty, he leaned his broad shoulder against Alara while nudging Darian's arm with his muzzle, as though refusing to choose between the two people who had become his family. Darian let out a quiet laugh, the sound surprisingly warm. He's decided, he said. Alara looked down at Rook before meeting the king's silver eyes. Perhaps he decided long ago. Darian nodded. I think he did. Neither spoke of destiny. Neither rushed toward promises neither had yet earned. Instead, they walked together through the gardens while Rook paced happily between them, no longer a feared shadow wandering alone through frozen woods, but living proof that compassion can change the course of lives, uncover hidden truth, and heal wounds that strength alone never could. And in the kingdom that had once known Alara Whitmore only as an overlooked Omega, people would someday remember her for something far greater. The woman who saved the wolf everyone feared without asking whose it was, and in doing so reminded a king, and an entire realm, that the bravest hearts are often the gentlest.